Alicia stood in the doorway of what had once been a perfectly reasonable storage space and was now home to 11 wolf pups of varying ages, temperaments, and opinions about appropriate breakfast timing. The scene before her looked like a small, furry tornado had achieved sentience and decided interior decorating was a competitive sport. 3 pups were engaged in what appeared to be a fierce debate over ownership of a worn leather ball, conducted entirely through growls, yips, and increasingly dramatic rolling maneuvers. 2 more were attempting to climb the shelving unit she'd specifically told them not to climb, with the confident determination of creatures who'd never encountered consequences for their actions. And the smallest one, a tiny black pup she'd named Shadow, was sitting directly on her foot, making the pitiful whimpering sounds that translated to, "I am starving and have been neglected for at least 7 entire minutes. It's been 5 minutes since breakfast," Alicia informed Shadow, who responded by whimpering more loudly and adding what she could only describe as tragic, abandoned pup eyes to the performance. "Don't fall for it," a dry voice called from the hallway. "That one's a professional manipulator. I saw him steal 3 sausages from the kitchen yesterday using that exact expression." Vera Blackwood, the tavern's cook, unofficial manager, and the only other person who knew about Alicia's growing collection of orphaned wolves, leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed and an expression of profound skepticism. She was a woman in her late 40s with steel gray hair, a face that suggested she'd seen everything twice and hadn't been impressed either time, and a sense of humor so dry it could dehydrate water. Shadow wouldn't steal. Despite the chaos around her, Alicia felt warmth bloom in her chest. Her pups were resourceful, clever, survivors in the truest sense, even if that survival sometimes involved creative interpretations of property ownership and appropriate begging techniques. "We need more supplies," Alicia said, mentally calculating their dwindling resources against 11 growing wolf pups who ate approximately their body weight in food every 3 days. "The butcher already visited the butcher this morning," Vera interrupted. "Told him we're feeding a lot of stray dogs out of charitable goodness. He gave me bones and scraps at half price and called me a saint among women," which was hilarious considering I'm pretty sure I'm going directly to whatever hell exists for people who water down expensive whiskey. "You water down the expensive whiskey?" Alicia asked, momentarily distracted. "Only for customers I don't like," Vera said with a shrug, "which is most of them. But we're getting off topic. The real problem isn't supplies, it's space. You've got 11 pups in a room designed for maybe 3 occupants, and I heard you talking to that woman from the border territories yesterday about one more who really needs help." Before Alicia could respond, a commotion from downstairs made both women freeze. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the coordinated purpose of trained warriors. Voices speaking in low, authoritative tones that made the hair on Alicia's neck stand up with instinctive warning. "That doesn't sound like our regular drunk lunch crowd," Vera observed, already moving toward the stairs with the casual alertness of someone prepared for trouble. Alicia quickly closed the storage room door, muffling the pup's noise, and followed Vera down to the tavern's main floor. The scene that greeted them made her steps falter halfway down the staircase. 6 wolves in formal territory guard uniforms stood just inside the entrance, their posture radiating authority and purpose. But it was the 7th figure that made Alicia's breath catch in her throat and her wolf, her supposedly weak, defective wolf, sit up and pay attention with an intensity she hadn't felt in 3 years. He stood at the center of his guards like a storm given human form, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of winter storms. He wore traveling clothes that somehow looked regal despite the dust of the road, and moved with the unconscious grace of someone who'd never doubted his right to occupy space. His scent hit her from across the room, pine and smoke and something wild that made her wolf whine with recognition, even though they'd never met. Power rolled off him in waves, the unmistakable signature of an alpha. Not just any alpha, an alpha king. Alicia knew exactly who he was before Vera whispered, "That's Kieran Nightshade, the alpha king of the Northern Territories. What in the actual frozen hell is he doing in our tavern?" King Kieran's gaze swept across the room with professional assessment, cataloging details and exits and potential threats. Then his eyes landed on Alicia, still frozen halfway down the staircase, and everything stopped. The tavern fell absolutely silent. Even the perpetually drunk patron in the corner seemed to hold his breath. The Alpha King stared at Alicia like he'd been searching for something specific and had just found it in the most unexpected place possible. His expression shifted through surprise, recognition, and something that looked almost like relief before settling into careful neutrality. "I'm looking for someone," King Kieran said, his voice deep and rough around the edges in a way that suggested he didn't waste words on unnecessary pleasantries. "A she-wolf who's been taking in orphaned pups. I was told I might find her here." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of implication through the room. Alicia's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had someone reported her? Were there laws about collecting stray wolves she'd somehow violated? Was this about pack boundaries or territorial disputes And why? Vera asked with the fearless directness of someone who'd faced down worse things than intimidating Alpha Kings. Would the Northern King be interested in a woman feeding stray dogs out of charitable goodness? One of the guards shifted slightly, but King Kieran raised a hand, stopping whatever response was coming. His attention hadn't left Alicia's face, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Because," he said slowly, like each word mattered, "those aren't stray dogs. They're orphaned wolf pups who shouldn't have survived alone but somehow found sanctuary with someone who can call them across territories. Someone with a gift that hasn't been seen in 3 centuries. Alicia's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," King Kieran countered gently. "You're Alicia Thornbrook, rejected by Silverpine Pack 3 years ago because your mate claimed your bond was weak. Except it wasn't weak. It was different. You're not a standard Omega." He took a step forward, and Alicia instinctively took a step back, which made Shadow, who'd somehow escaped the storage room and was now pressed against her leg, growl with surprising ferocity for something the size of a large potato. King Kieran stopped immediately, his expression shifting into something that looked like approval as he regarded the tiny black pup defending her with absolute commitment. "You're a shepherd," he said quietly. "A wolf born with the ability to call and protect the lost, to sense abandoned pups across vast distances and give them hope when they have none. The old texts speak of shepherds as the rarest of gifts, wolves chosen by the moon herself to ensure no pup ever suffers alone." The words hung in the air like something alive and impossible. "That's—" Alicia started, then stopped, because she didn't know what that was. Ridiculous? Impossible? Exactly what she'd been doing for 3 years without understanding why? "I need your help," King Kieran said. And now there was something raw in his voice beneath the authority. "My territory is filling with orphaned pups from a plague that swept through 3 packs last winter. Hundreds of young wolves with no families, no bonds, barely surviving in makeshift shelters. Our healers can feed them and provide basic care, but they're fading anyway. Losing hope, refusing to shift or eat or trust." He paused, and his winter storm eyes held something that might have been desperation. "I've been searching for a shepherd for 6 months, following rumors and old prophecies and hoping I'd find someone who could save them. And then I heard about a rejected Omega in a border town who collects lost pups like some wolves collect jewels, who somehow keeps them alive and happy when they should be dying of grief. I just feed them," Alicia protested weakly. "Give them warmth and safety. I'm not special. I'm just someone who couldn't walk away." "That's exactly what makes you special," King Kieran said. "The inability to walk away from suffering, the instinct to protect, the gift to call those who need you most." From upstairs came a crash, followed by several guilty-sounding yips that suggested the pups had discovered something they definitely shouldn't be investigating. Vera sighed. "That's probably the supply cabinet. Again, they've gotten very good at lockpicking, which is both impressive and deeply concerning." Despite the impossible conversation and the Alpha King standing in her tavern and the weight of words like shepherd and gift, Alicia felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. She gestured vaguely toward the stairs, toward her chaotic collection of orphaned pups who needed supervision before they accidentally demolished the building. "Show me," King Kieran said, and it wasn't quite a command, but also wasn't quite a request. "Let me see what you've built here. Then we can discuss what happens next." "What happens next?" Alicia thought with slightly hysterical clarity. Probably involves either accepting help from an impossibly attractive alpha king or being arrested for illegal pup hoarding. Possibly both. Shadow growled again, still defending her despite being thoroughly outmatched by 6 trained guards and an alpha king. "It's okay," Alicia murmured, bending to scoop up the tiny pup who'd appointed himself her personal protector. "Let's go make sure your siblings haven't completely destroyed everything I own." She walked back upstairs with as much dignity as possible while carrying a growling potato-sized wolf pup, acutely aware of King Kieran following 2 steps behind, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a physical weight. This morning she'd been a rejected Omega running a secret pup sanctuary in a tavern storage room. Now, apparently, she was a shepherd, whatever that meant, being recruited by an alpha king to save hundreds of orphaned pups. Her life had gotten very complicated very quickly. Shadow licked her chin sympathetically, which helped exactly nothing but was appreciated anyway. The storage room, which Alicia had spent 3 years optimizing for maximum pup capacity and minimum structural damage, looked like a small battlefield where the combatants were furry, 4-legged, and deeply committed to testing the tensile strength of every object within reach. King Kieran stood in the doorway, surveying the chaos with an expression that cycled through surprise, assessment, and what might have been carefully suppressed amusement as 3 pups immediately noticed his presence and froze mid-destruction like pups caught raiding a cookie jar. "That one," Vera said, pointing at a gray pup tangled in what used to be a curtain, "is Storm. Showed up 4 months ago, half-starved, with trust issues that would make a paranoid hermit look socially well-adjusted. Took Alicia 3 weeks to get him to accept food without growling at every shadow. Storm, hearing his name, managed to look both defiant and embarrassed about his current curtain situation. The twins over there," Vera continued with the air of someone conducting a very bizarre tour, "are Ash and Ember. Someone left them in a box near the river with a note that said, 'Cursed twins, bad luck.' They're the smartest pups I've ever met, which they mostly use for elaborate pranks and tactical food theft. Ash and Ember, identical gray pups with white-tipped ears, wagged their tails in perfect synchronization, apparently proud of their criminal reputation. And the one currently attempting to eat your bootlace," Vera finished, "is Trouble. We didn't name her that ironically." King Kieran looked down at the small brown pup who had indeed latched onto his boot with the determination of someone who'd found their life's calling. One of his guards moved to intervene, but the king raised a hand, stopping him. "Hello, Trouble," King Kieran said gravely, crouching down to the pup's level with the kind of natural ease that suggested he'd spent considerable time around young wolves. "That's an expensive boot you're attacking. Very fine leather from the eastern markets. Are you planning to eat it, or is this a dominance display?" Trouble released the boot long enough to yip something that sounded distinctly argumentative, then went back to gnawing with renewed enthusiasm. "Dominance display," one of the guards translated with barely suppressed amusement. "She says your boots are too fancy for a proper wolf, and you should wear something sensible." "My boots have been criticized by a pup," King Kieran observed. "This is a new experience." "Get used to it," Vera said dryly. "These pups have opinions about everything. Last week they held what I can only describe as a committee meeting about optimal napping arrangements. It lasted 2 hours and got heated." Alicia watched King Kieran interact with Trouble, patient and gentle despite the continued boot assault, and felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. She'd spent 3 years expecting judgment, preparing for the moment when someone would tell her she was foolish for taking in strays, wasting resources on pups who weren't hers to protect. Instead, an alpha king was crouching in her chaotic storage room, allowing a pup to critique his footwear choices, while his guards watched with the resigned patience of people who'd seen this exact scenario before. "You said there are hundreds in your territory," Alicia said quietly, pulling his attention away from Trouble's fashion commentary. "Hundreds of orphaned pups?" King Kieran stood, his expression shifting from gentle amusement to something heavier. The frost plague hit 3 packs in my northern territories last winter, leaving many young ones without families. We thought we'd contained it, set up shelters, assigned caregivers, brought in healers from every territory. He paused, and pain flickered across his face like a shadow. But they're fading anyway, refusing to bond with new adults, barely eating. Some have stopped shifting entirely, staying in wolf form because it's the last connection they have to their lost families. We're keeping them alive, but we're not giving them a reason to live. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of understanding through Alicia's mind. She knew exactly what he was describing, had seen it in Storm's eyes when he first arrived, in the way Shadow had initially refused any touch that suggested comfort. The hollow look of young wolves who'd lost everything and couldn't imagine trusting again. They need hope, Alicia said. Not just food and shelter. They need someone who understands their grief and doesn't try to fix it too fast. Someone who lets them be broken for a while before they're ready to heal. Yes, King Kieran said simply. Exactly that. And I have 6 months of evidence that I am catastrophically bad at providing it. You're an alpha king, one of the guards pointed out. You're supposed to be good at leading armies and negotiating treaties, not emotional support for traumatized pups. Thank you, Marcus, for that ringing endorsement of my parenting skills, King Kieran said dryly, earning snickers from 2 other guards. Marcus, a broad-shouldered wolf with a scar across his jaw and an expression that suggested he took nothing seriously, grinned unrepentantly. I'm just saying, Your Majesty, your talents lie more in the strategic military planning category, and less in the convincing small sad wolves that life is worth living category. No judgment. We all have our strengths. I'm judging, another guard muttered. That was definitely judgment adjacent. Before King Kieran could respond, Shadow, who'd been quiet in Alicia's arms, suddenly squirmed free and padded directly up to the Alpha King. The tiny black pup sat at his feet, looked up with those enormous golden eyes, and made a sound that was half whimper, half question. King Kieran froze, staring down at Shadow with an expression of complete bewilderment. What did he say? Alicia asked, because Shadow's particular dialect of puppy communication often required translation. He asked, one of the guards said slowly, clearly surprised, if the king is sad, because he has lost pups too. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush stone. King Kieran's jaw tightened, and for a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked enough to show the grief underneath. Yes, he said quietly, addressing Shadow directly. I have many lost pups now, hundreds of them, and I don't know how to help them feel safe again. Shadow considered this information with the gravity of someone far older than his few months. Then he did something that made every guard in the room suck in a sharp breath. He walked forward and pressed his small head against King Kieran's leg, the wolf equivalent of a comforting hug, offered from a pup to an alpha king. Well, Vera said into the stunned silence, I think Shadow just decided you're trustworthy. That's his highest endorsement. Last month he bit a merchant who tried to give Alicia fake silver coins, drew blood and everything. Very dramatic. I apologized extensively, Alicia added, and returned the fake coins, and maybe threatened to let Shadow bite him again if he tried to cheat anyone else in this tavern. You threatened a merchant with pup-related violence? King Kieran asked, and there was something that might have been admiration in his voice. Only mild violence, Alicia defended. Shadow's very small. The damage would have been minimal. Mostly psychological. I like you, Marcus announced. You're significantly more interesting than the usual diplomats we deal with. They're all proper protocol and appropriate behavior. You threaten people with tiny attack dogs. Attack wolves, Vera corrected. Let's be accurate about our threats. The absurdity of the conversation, discussing pup-based intimidation tactics with an alpha king and his guards while standing in a storage room full of orphaned wolves, made Alicia want to laugh and cry simultaneously. If I come with you, she heard herself say, the words emerging before her rational mind could stop them. What exactly would that involve? I can't just abandon these 11. They're mine to protect. Bring them, King Kieran said immediately. All of them. We have space, resources, healers. Your pups would be safe and cared for while you work with the others. And after? Alicia pressed, because she'd learned 3 years ago that assumptions about the future led to spectacular disappointment. After I've helped your orphaned pups, assuming I even can, what then? Do I return here? Stay in your territory? Get quietly escorted back to the border when I'm no longer useful? The question hung in the air, sharp with the memory of rejection and the fear of being used and discarded again. King Kieran's expression shifted into something fierce and certain. Then you stay, if you want, as a permanent member of my territory with full protection and resources. Not as a servant or temporary solution, as a valued member of the pack with authority over pup welfare and sanctuary operations. That's a significant commitment, Alicia said carefully. You don't know anything about me beyond collect stray pups and threatened a merchant with minimal violence. I know you walked away from a pack that rejected you instead of fighting to stay where you weren't wanted, King Kieran countered. I know you've spent 3 years protecting wolves nobody else cared about. I know 11 pups trust you enough to sleep soundly in a storage room, which suggests you've built something genuine here. He paused, and his winter storm eyes held something that looked like understanding. I also know you're terrified I'm going to be another Marcus Thornwood, someone who sees your worth only until it becomes inconvenient. But I'm not asking you to be my mate, or bear my heirs, or fulfill someone else's expectations. I'm asking you to do what you're already doing, just with more resources and hundreds more pups who desperately need exactly what you give. The honesty in his words struck something deep in Alicia's chest. The part of her that had been waiting 3 years for someone to acknowledge that she wasn't broken, just different. I need time, Alicia said. To think, to prepare, to make sure this isn't some elaborate setup that ends with me being disappointed again. Take until tomorrow morning, King Kieran said. That's as long as I can stay before I need to return. If you decide to come, we'll travel together with proper provisions and protection. If you decide to stay, I'll respect that choice and look elsewhere. And if I can't help your pups? Alicia asked quietly. If I'm not actually this shepherd you think I am, just someone who got lucky with 11 strays, then we'll figure out something else together, King Kieran said simply. But I don't think luck explains 3 years of successfully protecting orphaned pups who should have died alone. I think you're exactly what I've been searching for. Before Alicia could respond, Trouble, who'd been suspiciously quiet, chose that moment to successfully gnaw through King Kieran's bootlace, causing it to snap with a satisfying pop that made the pup yip with triumph. Your Majesty, Marcus said with barely suppressed laughter, you've been defeated by a pup named Trouble. How does it feel to have your dignity destroyed by someone who weighs less than a sack of potatoes? It feels, King Kieran said, looking down at the small brown pup who was now parading around with the bootlace like a trophy. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. His eyes found Alicia's again, warm with something that might have been hope. Think about it, he said. Tomorrow morning. Whatever you decide, I'll support. Then he and his guards retreated downstairs, leaving Alicia alone with Vera and 11 pups who'd suddenly gone very quiet, like they understood this decision would change everything. Well, Vera said into the silence, that was the most bizarre recruitment pitch I've ever witnessed. And I once watched a traveling circus try to convince me to join them as the amazing whip-wielding cook. This was weirder. He wants me to save hundreds of orphaned pups, Alicia said faintly. He wants you to do what you're already doing, just on a much larger scale with actual resources, Vera corrected. The question is, are you brave enough to try? Shadow pressed against Alicia's leg, whimpering softly. Not the scared sound, but the encouraging one he used when he thought she needed support. Around her, 10 other pups watched with varying degrees of curiosity and hope. And downstairs, an alpha king waited for an answer that would change everything. Alicia had until morning to decide if she was brave enough to stop hiding in a storage room and start believing she might actually be extraordinary. The terrifying part was that she was already starting to think the answer might be yes. Alicia spent that night staring at the ceiling of her small room while 11 wolf pups created a furry pile of warmth around her legs, each one snoring or twitching or making the small comfort sounds of creatures who felt safe enough to sleep deeply. Tomorrow morning, she would give King Kieran her answer. The problem was that Alicia still didn't know what that answer would be. Half of her, the half that had spent 3 years rebuilding herself after rejection, wanted to stay here in this familiar safety, keep her 11 pups, continue working at Vera's tavern, avoid risking her heart on another promise that might shatter. But the other half, the part that had walked away from Silverpine with her head high despite the humiliation, whispered that maybe, possibly, she'd been preparing for exactly this moment, that 3 years of learning to protect the lost had been leading towards something bigger than a storage room sanctuary. "What do you think?" she whispered to Shadow, who was curled against her side like a warm, furry security blanket. "Should we trust the impossibly attractive Alpha King who says I'm special? Or should we assume this is another disaster waiting to happen?" Shadow yawned, showing tiny sharp teeth, and burrowed deeper against her ribs, which Alicia interpreted as either "definitely trust him" or "stop having existential crises when I'm trying to sleep." Wolf-pup communication was sometimes ambiguous. A soft knock on her door made every pup's ear perk up simultaneously. "It's just me," Vera called through the wood. "I brought tea and unsolicited advice. May I enter your fortress of fur and indecision?" "Come in," Alicia said, carefully extricating herself from the pup pile without disturbing too many sleeping bodies. Vera entered carrying 2 steaming mugs that smelled of chamomile and honey, settling into the room's only chair with the comfortable ease of someone who'd had this exact late-night conversation dozens of times before. "Can't sleep?" Vera asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I'm trying to decide if accepting help from a stranger is brave or stupid," Alicia admitted. "The last time I trusted someone who said I was special, it ended with public rejection and 3 years of rebuilding my entire life. Marcus Thornwood was an idiot who couldn't recognize value when it was literally bonded to his soul," Vera said flatly. "King Kieran is offering you a job, not a mating bond." "That's significantly less complicated." "Is it though?" Alicia asked. "He's asking me to uproot everything, bring 11 pups into unknown territory, and somehow save hundreds of orphaned wolves using abilities I'm not sure I actually have. What if I get there and discover I can't help them? What if this shepherd thing is just his desperate interpretation of me being decent at pup care?" Vera sipped her tea with the patient air of someone waiting for the spiral of anxiety to complete its cycle. "You done catastrophizing? Or should I wait for the part where you convince yourself that going will somehow result in spontaneous combustion and general disaster?" Despite everything, Alicia laughed. "I'm done. Probably. Maybe." "Good," Vera said. "Now let me tell you what I see, and you can decide if I'm full of wisdom or full of something significantly less pleasant." She set down her mug and fixed Alicia with the kind of direct stare that suggested this was important. 3 years ago, a broken she-wolf showed up at my tavern asking for work and a place to stay. She was so skittish that loud noises made her flinch, so convinced of her own worthlessness that she apologized for existing in spaces. I gave her a job because I needed kitchen help and she seemed unlikely to steal from me. Alicia winced at the accurate description of her past self. "That same she-wolf," Vera continued, "spent 3 years transforming into someone who threatens merchants with pup-based violence, builds sanctuaries and storage rooms, and stands up to alpha kings without backing down. You did that. Not luck, not accident. You chose to become someone strong enough to protect others." She paused, letting the words sink in. "So when you ask me if going with King Kieran is brave or stupid, I say it's both. It's brave because you're risking safety for possibility. It's stupid because you're trusting someone you just met with something precious. But staying here because you're afraid of being hurt again? That's not safety, Alicia. That's just a different kind of prison." The words hit like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples that spread through Alicia's carefully constructed defenses. "What if I fail?" Alicia whispered. "What if I can't save his pups?" "Then you fail," Vera said simply. "And you learn from it and try something else. Failure isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Never trying is worse. Staying small because someone once told you that you weren't enough is worse. Hiding in a storage room when you could be changing hundreds of lives is worse. Shadow, apparently tired of the emotional conversation happening above him, yawned dramatically and crawled into Alicia's lap, his version of demanding attention and possibly offering moral support. "Your pups trust you," Vera said, gesturing at the furry pile currently occupying most of the bed. "They followed you across territories because they knew you'd keep them safe. Maybe it's time to trust yourself the same way." "You're annoyingly wise for someone who waters down expensive whiskey," Alicia said, scratching Shadow behind his ears and earning a contented rumble. "I contain multitudes," Vera said dryly. "Most of them are sarcastic and wine-adjacent, but occasionally I have moments of genuine insight. This is one of them. Don't waste it by overthinking." They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, drinking tea while 11 pups snored, and the night outside painted the world in shades of silver and shadow. "If I go," Alicia said slowly, working through the logistics, The tavern will be fine," Vera interrupted. "I've been running this place for 20 years. I can manage without you disrupting my kitchen organization and sneaking food scraps to your furry criminals." "They're not criminals," Alicia protested. "They're just creatively resourceful. They're criminals with good publicity," Vera corrected. "But they're your criminals, and you should take them somewhere they can be creatively resourceful with actual space and resources instead of my rapidly depleting food stores." The casual acceptance in Vera's voice, the assumption that Alicia should go, was meant for bigger things than hiding in storage rooms, made something settle in Alicia's chest. "I'm going to miss you," Alicia said quietly. "I'm going to miss you too," Vera admitted. "You're the best kitchen help I've ever had, and you never once complained about the drunk patrons or the occasional bar fight, or that incident with the traveling bard who thought singing at maximum volume for 6 straight hours constituted entertainment." "That bard was enthusiastic," Alicia said diplomatically. "That bard was a menace who drove away half my customers," Vera corrected. "But you didn't murder him, which showed admirable restraint. I appreciated that." Despite the fear and uncertainty churning in her stomach, Alicia felt warmth bloom in her chest. Vera had given her safety when she'd had nothing, had asked no questions about her past, made no judgments about her present, and quietly supported every decision to take in another lost pup despite the chaos it created. "Thank you," Alicia said, meaning it for so much more than just tonight's conversation. "For everything. For giving me a place when I needed one. For not asking questions. For making me believe I could be more than broken." "You were never broken," Vera said firmly. "Just cracked in places. There's a difference. Cracked things can be mended. Broken implies beyond repair, and you were always worth repairing." She stood, collecting both mugs with practiced efficiency. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you're going to walk downstairs and tell an alpha king that yes, you'll help save his pups. And then you're going to pack up your furry criminals, say a dramatic goodbye to this storage room, and go prove that being rejected by one idiot doesn't define your worth." "That's a very specific prediction about tomorrow," Alicia observed. "I'm confident in my assessment," Vera said with a slight smile. "I've watched you become brave one small choice at a time for 3 years. This is just another choice. You'll make the right one." After Vera left, Alicia lay back down in the pup pile, feeling 11 small bodies shift and adjust around her like puzzle pieces finding their places. Shadow crawled up to press his nose against her cheek, his version of a goodnight kiss. "Okay," Alicia whispered into the darkness. "Tomorrow we're going to be brave. We're going to trust that maybe, possibly, I'm exactly who King Kieran says I am. We're going to take a chance on something bigger than this storage room." Around her, 10 other pups made sounds of sleepy agreement. And Alicia, rejected Omega, sanctuary builder, possible shepherd of lost souls, closed her eyes and let herself believe that maybe she was allowed to be extraordinary after all. The terrifying part was that she was starting to want it. Morning arrived with the subtle grace of 11 wolf pups, simultaneously deciding that dawn was an excellent time to practice their howling skills, which sounded less like majestic calls to the moon and more like a choir of enthusiastic but deeply untalented singers attempting opera. Alicia woke to the sound of trouble leading what could only be described as a motivational howling session, complete with Ash and Ember providing harmonies that suggested they'd never actually heard proper howling before and were improvising wildly. "It's too early for this level of chaos," Alicia muttered into her pillow, earning a sympathetic lick from Shadow, who was the only pup with enough sense to remain quietly snuggled. But today was the day. Decision day. The day she would walk downstairs and either accept King Kieran's offer or politely decline and return to her comfortable, predictable life of storage room sanctuary management and merchant threats. She dressed with more care than usual, not the rough work clothes she wore in the kitchen, but the one decent traveling outfit she owned. Dark green tunic and practical leather pants that said, "I'm capable of handling wilderness adventures," while hopefully not screaming, "I spent 20 minutes this morning panicking about making the wrong choice." The pups sensed something significant was happening. They gathered around her legs as she descended the stairs, forming a small furry escort that made walking significantly more complicated, but provided emotional support. The tavern's main room was empty except for Vera behind the bar and King Kieran at a corner table, speaking quietly with his guards. He looked up when Alicia entered, and something in his expression shifted, hope mixed with careful neutrality, like he was preparing himself for disappointment but didn't want to show it. Marcus, the guard with the scar and perpetual amusement, noticed Alicia's entrance first. "Gentlemen, our mysterious shepherd has arrived. Everyone look appropriately serious and diplomatic." "We are serious and diplomatic," another guard protested. "You're eating pie for breakfast," Marcus pointed out. "That's not diplomatic. That's just poor decision-making disguised as morning nutrition. Pie is an acceptable breakfast food," the guard defended. "It has fruit. Fruit is healthy. It has sugar and pastry," Marcus corrected. "The fruit is incidental. Can we maybe focus on the actual important conversation instead of debating breakfast philosophy?" A third guard suggested, earning glares from both pie defenders and critics. King Kieran looked like he was reconsidering his choice in royal guards but was too committed to the dynamic to change it now. "If everyone is finished discussing nutritional ethics, perhaps we could allow Alicia to actually speak?" All eyes turned to her, and Alicia felt the weight of the decision settle over her shoulders like a physical thing. 11 pups pressed closer, offering silent support. Shadow climbed onto her foot, his version of, "I'm here and I believe in you." "I've made a decision," Alicia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I have conditions." King Kieran straightened, attention fully focused. "Name them." "First, my 11 pups stay with me. Not in some separate shelter or training program. With me, under my direct care and protection. They're mine." "Agreed," King Kieran said immediately. "I'd never separate you from them." "Second, I want full authority over pup welfare and sanctuary operations. If I say something isn't working, we change it. No committees, no debates, no but we've always done it this way nonsense from wolves who think they know better." One of the guards sucked in a breath at her bluntness, but King Kieran's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Agreed," he said. "You'll have complete autonomy over pup-related decisions. Anyone who questions your authority answers to me." "Third," Alicia continued, gaining confidence as he accepted each condition. "If this doesn't work, if I can't help your orphaned pups or discover I'm not actually this shepherd you think I am, you let me leave. No obligations, no guilt, no forcing me to stay because you've already invested resources. I walk away freely." This time King Kieran hesitated, something flickering in his winter storm eyes that looked like pain at the thought of her leaving. "If you genuinely can't help and want to go, I won't stop you. But I reserve the right to try convincing you to stay anyway, because I suspect once you meet those pups, you won't be able to walk away even if you wanted to." The honesty in his words struck something deep in Alicia's chest. He wasn't promising easy agreement. He was promising truth. That felt significant. "And finally," Alicia said, pulling together all her courage for the last condition. "No mating expectations, no pressure to bond with anyone, no assumptions that because I'm helping your territory, I'm available for romantic arrangements. I'm there for the pups, Not to solve your succession concerns or whatever it is Alpha Kings worry about regarding heirs and bloodlines. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack stone. Then Marcus started laughing. Deep, genuine laughter that made several pups jump in surprise. "Oh, I like her. Your Majesty, she just preemptively shut down every marriage-minded noble in a 100-mile radius. That's efficiency." "Marcus," King Kieran said with strained patience, "you're not helping." "I'm absolutely helping," Marcus countered. "I'm providing comic relief during what was becoming a very tense negotiation. You should be thanking me. I should be replacing you with guards who understand appropriate timing," King Kieran muttered, but there was no real heat in it. He turned back to Alicia, his expression serious despite his guard's commentary. "No mating expectations, no pressure. You're there as a valued member of the pack with full autonomy over your personal choices. Anyone who suggests otherwise will deal with me, and I promise that conversation will be deeply unpleasant for them." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Alicia's wolf sit up and pay attention in a way that was probably inconvenient, given her no romantic arrangements condition. "Then I accept," Alicia said before she could reconsider. "I'll come with you to the Northern Territory. I'll try to help your orphaned pups. And if I fail spectacularly, at least it will be an interesting story to tell." "You won't fail," King Kieran said with absolute certainty, standing and crossing the room until he was close enough that she could smell pine and smoke and something wild that made her breath catch. "You're exactly what those pups need. What we need." He extended his hand, formal, respectful, waiting for her to accept the gesture. Alicia placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, and the slight calluses that spoke of someone who trained with weapons regularly. The touch sent an unexpected spark up her arm that had nothing to do with mate bonds, and everything to do with simple, undeniable attraction, which was extremely inconvenient, given her no romantic arrangements speech approximately 2 minutes ago. "When do we leave?" Alicia asked, pulling her hand back before she did something foolish like hold on longer than professionally necessary. "This afternoon," King Kieran said. "My guards have already arranged supplies and transportation. We'll travel in comfort. Closed carriage for you and the pups. Mounted guards for protection. 3 days to reach my territory, if weather holds. 3 days in a carriage with 11 energetic wolf pups," Marcus observed. "That sounds like a special kind of chaos. I volunteer to ride as far away from that carriage as possible while still technically providing protection." "Coward," another guard said. "Realist?" Marcus corrected. "I've met those pups. Trouble destroyed His Majesty's boot in approximately 4 minutes. I'm not risking my equipment." "Your equipment is significantly less expensive than the King's," the guard pointed out. "Which is exactly why I need to protect it more carefully," Marcus said with impeccable logic. "The King can afford new boots. I cannot afford new dignity if I'm defeated by something called Trouble who weighs less than my sword." Despite the nerves churning in her stomach, Alicia laughed. King Kieran's guards were nothing like the formal, stuffy warriors she'd expected. They were professionals who happened to have personalities and didn't take themselves so seriously that humor became impossible. "I should pack," Alicia said, looking down at her 11 pups who were watching the proceedings with varying degrees of interest. Storm looked suspicious, Ash and Ember looked excited, and Trouble was attempting to stealthily approach Marcus's boots for a second opinion on guard footwear quality. "We'll be ready when you are," King Kieran said. "Take your time. Say your goodbyes. This is a significant change." Alicia nodded and retreated upstairs to the storage room that had been home for 3 years. Vera appeared within minutes, carrying empty bags and the kind of efficient energy that suggested she'd already been preparing for this moment. "Let's pack up your criminals," Vera said briskly. "And don't you dare start crying or I'll start crying, and then we'll both be useless for the next hour." "I'm not crying," Alicia protested, even as her eyes stung with unshed tears. "Good," Vera said. "Keep not crying while I help you pack 11 pups worth of supplies and pretend I'm not going to miss you desperately." They worked in companionable silence, folding blankets and packing toys and gathering the small trinkets that had accumulated over 3 years of pup care. Shadow supervised from his position on the bed, occasionally offering commentary through small yips that suggested he had opinions about what should and shouldn't be packed. "He's a good king," Vera said quietly, while wrapping a set of feeding bowls in cloth. "I asked around this morning. Sent word to some contacts in the Northern Territory. Everyone says Kieran Nightshade is fair, honorable, genuinely cares about his people. If you're going to trust someone with your safety, he's a decent choice." "You investigated him?" Alicia asked, surprised and touched. "Of course I investigated him," Vera said with a snort. "You think I'd let you run off with some random alpha king without checking if he's secretly terrible? I have standards for the people I allow to recruit my employees." The casual care in her words, the assumption that Alicia's safety mattered enough to warrant investigation, made the tears harder to hold back. "Thank you," Alicia whispered. "For everything. For 3 years of safety and support and pretending you didn't notice when I was falling apart." "I noticed," Vera said softly. "I just knew you needed time to put yourself back together. And look at you now, walking away from safety towards something bigger because you're finally brave enough to believe you deserve it." She pulled Alicia into a fierce hug that smelled of kitchen herbs and wine and home. "Now go save some pups," Vera said, pulling back with suspiciously bright eyes. "And write me letters occasionally, so I know you haven't been eaten by bears or defeated by the Northern Territory's social expectations." "I'll write," Alicia promised. "Monthly updates featuring pup chaos and whatever disasters I accidentally create." "I'm counting on it," Vera said. "My life is going to be much less interesting without you disrupting it daily." 2 hours later, Alicia stood in the tavern courtyard surrounded by packed bags, 11 excited pups, and a royal carriage that looked far too elegant for transporting a rejected Omega and her collection of furry criminals. King Kieran approached, his expression warm with something that might have been pride. "Ready?" Alicia looked back at the tavern one last time, at Vera standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her chin high, at the storage room window where she'd spent 3 years building safety from nothing. Then she looked at the carriage, at the patient guards, at the Alpha King who believed she was extraordinary. "Ready," Alicia said, scooping up Shadow and heading toward her impossible future. Behind her, Vera called out, "Try not to threaten too many nobles with pup-based violence, or do, 'I'm not your supervisor anymore.'" Marcus snorted with laughter. "I take back everything I said about this being a terrible idea. This is going to be extremely entertaining." And as the carriage rolled forward toward the Northern Territory and hundreds of orphaned pups who needed hope, Alicia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly the shepherd they'd been waiting for, even if she still had no idea what that actually meant. 3 days in a closed carriage with 11 wolf pups taught Alicia several important lessons about logistics, patience, and the surprisingly creative ways small wolves could cause chaos in confined spaces. Lesson 1. Ash and Ember viewed the carriage interior as an elaborate jungle gym that existed specifically for their acrobatic entertainment. They'd spent the first 6 hours inventing games that involved launching themselves from seat to seat, while making sound effects that suggested they were engaged in epic aerial battles. Lesson 2. Trouble had appointed herself the official inspector of all guard supplies and had somehow managed to inspect Marcus's spare bootlaces, 2 canteens, someone's leather gloves, and what appeared to be a formal military medal that Marcus was now frantically searching for. Lesson 3. Storm had travel anxiety that manifested in excessive pacing and suspicious glaring at every tree they passed, like the forest itself might attack at any moment. And Lesson 4. Shadow refused to leave Alicia's lap for any reason, transforming into a small, warm, furry security blanket who occasionally growled at suspicious shadows and demanded regular reassurance that everything was fine. "I'm starting to understand why Marcus volunteered to ride on the opposite side of our travel formation," Alicia muttered, extracting Trouble from someone's bag for the 3rd time that hour, while Ash and Ember performed what looked like synchronized backflips off the carriage walls. King Kieran, who'd been riding alongside the carriage but occasionally checked in at rest stops, appeared at their current breakpoint, looking amused and slightly concerned. "How's the chaos management going?" he asked, watching Trouble make a determined beeline for his boots the moment she spotted him. Your boots have become her nemesis, Alicia informed him. She's taken it personally that you wear footwear she considers unnecessarily fancy for someone who spends time in forests. I don't make the rules. I just translate them. My boots are practical, King Kieran defended, quickly lifting Trouble before she could begin her assault. The pup squirmed in his arms, making indignant sounds about being thwarted. Your boots are made from exotic leather with silver buckles, Alicia pointed out. Trouble has standards regarding appropriate wilderness attire. You're violating them. I'm being fashion-shamed by a pup, King Kieran observed, holding Trouble at eye level. You know, most wolves in my territory are too intimidated to criticize my clothing choices. Trouble yipped something that Marcus, who'd wandered over to witness the interaction, translated with barely suppressed laughter. She says that's because everyone else is too scared to tell you the truth, and she's providing a valuable service. I'm being roasted by something I could hold in one hand, King Kieran said with resignation. My authority is clearly terrifying. To be fair, another guard interjected, Trouble destroyed your bootlace in 4 minutes during your first meeting. She's already established dominance. This is just maintenance. I'm not accepting dominance from a pup named Trouble, King Kieran said firmly, though his gentle handling of said pup somewhat undermined the statement. Too late? Marcus said cheerfully. She's already won. The rest is just you processing the loss. Before King Kieran could respond, Storm, who'd been pacing the perimeter of their rest stop with increasing agitation, suddenly froze, his entire body going rigid as his attention fixed on something in the forest. Every guard immediately shifted into alert mode, hands moving to weapons with practiced efficiency. King Kieran set Trouble down gently and moved toward Storm with the focused intensity of someone taking a potential threat seriously. What is it? He asked quietly, crouching beside the gray pup who was now growling low in his throat. Storm whined, then shifted partially, an awkward half-form that young pups sometimes used when they were too distressed to complete a full transformation. He pointed with one partially formed paw toward a dense section of undergrowth. Something's there, Alicia said, moving to Storm's side and feeling his fear through the connection she'd developed with her pups. Something that's scared. Young, hiding. King Kieran's expression shifted from warrior alertness to something softer. He gestured to his guards to hold position, then moved slowly toward the undergrowth, his movements careful and non-threatening. It's all right, he called out gently. You're safe. No one here will hurt you. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so quietly Alicia almost missed it, a small sound emerged from the shadows, the whimpering cry of a terrified wolf pup. There's a pup out here, King Kieran said, his voice tight with concern. Alone. Storm must have sensed them. Alicia acted on instinct, moving forward before her rational mind could suggest caution. She knelt at the edge of the undergrowth, making herself small and non-threatening. Hey there, she said softly, using the same tone that had worked on 11 other frightened pups. I know you're scared. I know you probably don't trust anyone right now, but I promise you're safe. My name is Alicia, and I protect lost pups. It's kind of my whole thing. Another whimper, slightly closer this time. I've got food, Alicia continued. Real food, not scavenged scraps. And I've got warm blankets. And there's a pup named Shadow who's about your size and very good at sharing space. He's excellent company for wolves who need quiet support without a lot of questions. Movement in the shadows. Then, slowly, a small red-brown pup emerged. Female, maybe 3 months old, so thin that her ribs showed through her fur. Her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much loss too young. There you are, Alicia said gently, not reaching out, just waiting. You're beautiful, and you're going to be okay. I know that's hard to believe right now, but I promise it's true. The pup took one hesitant step, then another, drawn by something she probably didn't understand. The same pull that had brought 11 other lost souls to Alicia's doorstep over 3 years. When she was close enough, Alicia slowly extended her hand, letting the pup sniff and decide if trust was possible. For a breathless moment, the pup just stared at Alicia's hand like it might be a trap. Then, with visible effort, She pressed her nose against Alicia's palm, the smallest gesture of tentative faith. "Good girl," Alicia whispered, carefully scooping up the trembling pup. "You're safe now. I've got you." The pup buried her face against Alicia's chest and began crying. Deep, broken sounds that spoke of weeks of loneliness and fear and trying to survive alone. Around them, King Kieran's guards had gone very quiet. Marcus looked suspiciously like he might be fighting emotion. And King Kieran himself stared at Alicia with an expression that mixed awe with something that looked like vindication. "That's 12 pups now," he said quietly. "Found in the middle of nowhere, called to you by something beyond normal pack bonds." "She was just scared," Alicia protested weakly, even as the pup in her arms relaxed in a way that suggested she'd finally found safety after far too long without it. "She was all alone in the wilderness and running out of strength," King Kieran corrected gently. "Another day and she might not have made it. But Storm sensed her, sensed that she needed you, and now she's going to live." He moved closer, his voice dropping into something raw and honest. "This is what I've been trying to tell you. This gift you have. It's not luck or coincidence. You call them. Across distances, through forests, beyond normal pack territory boundaries. They feel you like a beacon and follow that pull because something deeper than instinct tells them your safety. Alicia started. "You're a shepherd," King Kieran interrupted firmly. "And you just proved it again. In the middle of a forest, with no preparation, you called a dying pup to safety using nothing but that gift." The new pup whimpered, and Alicia instinctively began making the soft comfort sounds that always seem to help. Within seconds, the trembling eased and the pup's breathing steadied. "What should we name her?" Marcus asked, his voice suspiciously rough. "Since apparently we're now traveling with 12 wolves and I need to update my mental roster." Alicia looked down at the small red-brown pup who'd fought so hard to survive alone. "Hope," she said quietly, "because that's what she represents. Hope that lost pups can still be found. Hope that loneliness doesn't have to be permanent. Hope that there's always a chance for safety." "Hope it is," King Kieran said, and the warmth in his voice made Alicia's chest tighten with something complicated. They resumed travel with 12 pups instead of 11. Hope curled in Alicia's lap alongside Shadow, both small wolves providing mutual comfort. Storm had visibly relaxed after the rescue, like saving another pup had eased some of his own anxiety about the journey. That night at camp, King Kieran found Alicia sitting slightly apart from the others, watching her now 12 pups settle into sleep, with the practiced efficiency of creatures who trusted her completely. "Can I join you?" he asked, respecting her space enough to wait for permission. "It's your camp," Alicia pointed out. "It's your moment," he countered. "I'm just asking to share it." She nodded, and he settled beside her with comfortable ease, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, but not so close that it felt presumptuous. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching stars emerge against darkening sky. "Thank you," King Kieran said finally, "for coming, for trusting me enough to take this chance, for saving Hope today even though you're still convinced you're not actually special." "I'm not convinced I'm not special," Alicia corrected. "I'm just cautiously uncertain about the extent of my specialness." "That's the most diplomatic way I've ever heard someone say, 'I think you're exaggerating my abilities,'" King Kieran observed with amusement. "I'm working on accepting compliments," Alicia admitted. 3 years ago, someone told me I was fundamentally broken. It's taking time to rewrite that narrative." King Kieran was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice held something fierce. "Marcus Thornwood is an idiot who couldn't recognize value if it came with instructional diagrams and a detailed manual. His loss is my territory's gain." The protective edge in his words made Alicia's wolf perk up with interest, which was inconvenient given her very clear, no romantic arrangements boundary from 3 days ago. "You keep defending me," she said quietly, "even though you barely know me. Why?" King Kieran turned to look at her directly, his winter storm eyes reflecting firelight. "Because I've spent 6 months watching pups fade despite having food, shelter, and care. I've held wolves barely old enough to shift who'd given up on living because their grief was too heavy to carry. And then I heard about a rejected Omega who somehow kept lost pups alive and thriving in a storage room using nothing but determination and compassion. He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. You give them hope when they have none. You see their pain and don't try to fix it too quickly. You let them be broken while still promising they can heal. That's not a common gift, Alicia. That's extraordinary. And anyone who couldn't see that doesn't deserve to be in your life. The honesty in his words struck something deep in Alicia's chest. The part that had been waiting 3 years for someone to acknowledge that she wasn't weak, just different. I'm still terrified I'll fail, she admitted. That I'll get to your territory and discover I can't actually help. That this gift you think I have is just me being decent at reading emotions and getting lucky. Then we'll figure out something else together, King Kieran said simply, echoing his words from their first meeting. But I don't think you'll fail. I think you're going to change everything. Hope chose that moment to wake up and crawl into Alicia's lap, making sleepy comfort sounds. Shadow immediately joined her, not wanting to be left out of the cuddle pile. Your lap is very popular real estate, King Kieran observed. It's the only warm spot that promises safety and unconditional acceptance, Alicia said, gently stroking both pups. They're very practical about resource allocation. Practical and emotionally intelligent, King Kieran said. No wonder they thrive under your care. They fell back into comfortable silence, and Alicia allowed herself to believe, just for this moment, that maybe she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Tomorrow they would reach the Northern Territory. Tomorrow she would meet hundreds of orphaned pups who needed hope. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, she had 12 sleeping pups, a sky full of stars, and an alpha king who believed she was extraordinary. That felt like enough. The Northern Territory announced itself through scent before sight. Pine forests so dense they seemed to swallow sunlight, mountain air sharp with coming winter, and underneath it all, the complex layering of pack boundaries marked by hundreds of wolves claiming home. Alicia pressed her face against the carriage window, watching the landscape transform from neutral border forests into clearly marked packlands. Stone markers appeared at regular intervals, each one carved with symbols she didn't recognize but that somehow communicated, "You are entering somewhere important." Her 12 pups sensed the change in atmosphere. Even Trouble had abandoned boot-gnawing in favor of pressing against the window alongside Ash and Ember, their small noses leaving fog patterns on the glass. "Big," Ember yipped, which Storm translated into what Alicia had learned to recognize as his particular frequency of communication. "Very big," Alicia agreed. "Bigger than anything we've seen before." The carriage crested a hill, and suddenly, the full scope of King Kieran's territory spread before them like something from a legend. A massive stone fortress rose against the mountains. Not the cold, forbidding kind of fortress from warning stories, but something that managed to look both defensible and welcoming. Buildings clustered around the central structure in organized chaos, and even from this distance, Alicia could see wolves moving through streets and courtyards with the comfortable ease of people who belonged. "Sweet moon above," Alicia whispered. "That's where we're going?" Marcus, who'd been riding alongside their carriage for the final approach, called through the window. "Welcome to Nightshade Keep. Try not to be too impressed. His Majesty's ego is already adequately sized." "I heard that." King Kieran's voice responded from somewhere ahead. "You were meant to," Marcus called back cheerfully. The carriage rolled through main gates wide enough to accommodate 3 wagons side by side, and immediately they were surrounded by the organized chaos of a functioning pack territory. Merchants called out wares from market stalls. Warriors practiced in a training yard that looked large enough to accommodate 50 fighters. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, Alicia saw wolves. Pack wolves moving with purpose, families walking together, young wolves learning trades from their elders. The kind of vibrant, living community that she'd only experienced briefly in Silverpine before her rejection. The carriage stopped before the keep's main entrance, and King Kieran appeared at the door, offering his hand to help her down with old-fashioned courtesy. "Welcome home," he said. and something in the way he said, home, made Alicia's chest tighten with complicated emotion. This is a lot, Alicia managed, watching her 12 pups tumble out of the carriage in various states of excitement and overwhelm. Trouble immediately began investigating the courtyard stones like they might be hiding something interesting. Shadow pressed against Alicia's leg, seeking reassurance in the face of so many new scents and sounds. It's overwhelming, King Kieran acknowledged. I should have prepared you better for the scale, but I wanted you to see it without preconceptions. See the community these pups would be joining. Before Alicia could respond, a woman emerged from the keep's entrance with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she was either very important or very convinced of her own importance. She was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair braided in an intricate style and clothes that managed to be both practical and elegant. Your Majesty, the woman said, bowing slightly to King Kieran before turning sharp eyes on Alicia. This is the shepherd you've been searching for? Alicia Thornbrook, King Kieran said with formal courtesy. May I introduce Meredith Ashwood, my head of pack management and the person who actually runs this territory while I'm off doing impressive king things. Meredith's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. You mean while you're off making speeches and looking regal while I handle the actual logistics? Exactly that, King Kieran agreed easily. Meredith, Alicia has agreed to help with our orphaned pups situation. She'll need quarters prepared for herself and her 12 charges, full access to the pup shelters, and whatever resources she requests. Meredith's sharp eyes swept over Alicia with assessment that felt uncomfortably thorough. Then her gaze dropped to the 12 pups currently investigating everything within reach. 12, Meredith said. You collected 12 orphaned pups in a border town and kept them all alive in what I'm told was a tavern storage room. Technically, it was a very large storage room, Alicia said, then immediately regretted the defensive tone. But Meredith's expression softened into something that looked almost like approval. Anyone who can manage 12 pups in confined quarters has my respect. Follow me. I'll show you your new accommodations, which have significantly more space than a storage room and hopefully fewer drunk patrons. She turned and strode back into the keep with the confident assumption that everyone would follow. King Kieran shot Alicia an encouraging look, and Marcus made helpful, she's terrifying but fair gestures that did absolutely nothing to ease Alicia's nerves. The keep's interior was overwhelming in its scale. High ceilings supported by carved stone pillars, tapestries depicting pack history covering walls, and everywhere the signs of a living, breathing community. Wolves nodded respectfully as King Kieran passed, but their attention quickly shifted to Alicia and her small, furry entourage, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright shock. They're staring, Alicia whispered. You're walking through their territory with 12 pups following you like you're the moon itself, Marcus pointed out helpfully. Of course they're staring. It's extremely weird and also kind of impressive. Not helping, Alicia muttered. I'm rarely helpful, Marcus agreed. I'm more decorative and occasionally amusing during tense moments. Meredith led them through corridors and up several flights of stairs until they reached a wing that looked recently renovated. She opened a door to reveal a suite of rooms that made Alicia stop in her tracks. It wasn't just large. It was specifically designed for exactly what she needed. A main living space with comfortable seating and a fireplace. A separate sleeping area with a bed large enough to accommodate a reasonable number of pups who refused to sleep anywhere except pressed against her. And what looked like a dedicated pup room with cushioned sleeping areas, toy storage, and windows positioned low enough that small wolves could look outside. This is... Alicia struggled for words that weren't completely overwhelming and possibly too much. Adequate, Meredith finished crisply. King Kieran had these rooms prepared 3 months ago, when he first started searching for a shepherd. He was quite specific about the requirements. Space for pups, natural light, close enough to his quarters for easy communication but far enough for privacy. She paused, and something almost warm entered her tone. He's been hoping you existed for half a year. Don't make him regret the faith. Before Alicia could respond, Trouble discovered the pup room and yipped something that made all 11 other pups immediately rush to investigate. Within seconds, the space filled with excited sounds as they explored their new territory. "They approve," Marcus observed unnecessarily. "Tomorrow I'll take you to the main pup shelters," Meredith said, all business again. "There are 3 facilities across the territory housing approximately 400 orphaned pups of varying ages. Your role will be to provide whatever it is you do that makes lost pups thrive instead of fade." "No pressure," Alicia said weakly. "Considerable pressure, actually," Meredith corrected. "But King Kieran believes you're capable, and his judgment is usually sound." Usually. The incident with the purple formal robes was questionable. "The purple was regal," King Kieran protested. "The purple made you look like an oversized grape," Meredith said without mercy. "We burned them. Everyone agreed it was necessary." Marcus made a sound that suggested he was trying very hard not to laugh and failing spectacularly. "I'm being roasted about fashion choices by my own pack management," King Kieran observed. "My authority is clearly absolute and unchallenged." "Your authority is perfectly intact," Meredith assured him. "We just exercise our right to provide honest feedback about questionable aesthetic decisions. It's traditional." Despite her overwhelming nerves about tomorrow, Alicia felt laughter bubble up. This territory, these wolves, felt real in a way that Silverpine never had. People spoke honestly instead of hiding behind proper protocol. King Kieran accepted criticism about purple robes without threatening anyone. And somehow, impossibly, that made everything feel slightly less terrifying. "Get settled tonight," Meredith said, heading toward the door. "Tomorrow we begin the actual work. And Alicia?" She paused at the threshold, her expression serious. "The pups in the shelters are struggling. They're physically healthy but emotionally withdrawn. If you can help them, if even half of what I've heard about your gift is true, you'll have this entire territory's eternal gratitude. And if you can't," she trailed off meaningfully. "If I can't, I'll still try," Alicia said quietly. "I won't abandon them just because it's difficult." Meredith studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good. That's the answer I needed to hear." After she left, King Kieran lingered in the doorway, watching Alicia's pups explore their new home with obvious delight. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming, for trying, for being brave enough to believe you might be extraordinary." "I'm still not convinced about the extraordinary part," Alicia admitted. "But I'm here. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," King Kieran corrected. Then, with visible reluctance, "I should let you rest. Tomorrow will be intense. But if you need anything tonight, anything at all, my quarters are at the end of this hallway. Don't hesitate." He left before Alicia could respond, and she stood in her new room surrounded by 12 excited pups and the weight of 400 orphaned wolves who needed hope. Tomorrow, she would meet them. Tomorrow, she would discover if this gift King Kieran believed in was real or just wishful thinking. Tomorrow, everything would change. Shadow crawled into her lap, whimpering softly, his way of asking if she was okay. "I don't know," Alicia admitted to the tiny black pup who'd been with her longest. "But we're going to find out together." Hope joined them, pressing her small red-brown body against Alicia's side. And surrounded by 12 wolves who'd followed her into the unknown, Alicia let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow wouldn't be a disaster. The terrifying part was that she was starting to genuinely hope it wouldn't be. The first pup shelter sat at the northern edge of the keep's main compound, a large stone building that looked structurally sound but emotionally hollow, in a way Alicia couldn't quite explain until she walked through the doors. Then understanding hit like a physical blow. The shelter was clean, well-maintained, temperature-controlled. Adult wolves moved through with professional efficiency, distributing food and checking on basic needs. Every practical requirement was met. But the pups themselves looked like shadows of what young wolves should be. They sat in small clusters or alone, many in wolf form, barely moving even when adults approached with food. Their eyes held that hollow look Alicia recognized from Storm and Hope, the expression of creatures who'd lost everything and couldn't imagine trusting again. "Sweet moon," Alicia whispered, her heart clenching with immediate visceral pain at the sight of so much concentrated grief. Beside her, King Kieran's expression had gone carefully neutral. The kind of neutrality that came from regularly witnessing something that broke your heart and trying to maintain composure anyway. "This is Shelter 1, Meredith said quietly, her usual brisk tone softened by something that might have been sympathy. Approximately 140 pups, ages ranging from 3 months to 2 years, 20 adult caregivers on rotating shifts, medical care provided by our healers, everything they need for physical survival. But not emotional survival, Alicia said, watching a small gray pup in the corner refuse food from a caregiver who looked exhausted and defeated. "No," King Kieran agreed. "Not emotional survival. We've tried everything. Play activities, training programs, pairing them with mentor wolves. Some improve slightly. Most just exist, going through the motions of living without actually engaging with life." Alicia's 12 pups had followed her into the shelter despite Meredith's initial protest that it wasn't protocol. Now they spread through the space with the unself-conscious confidence of wolves who'd never questioned their right to belong, approaching the hollow-eyed orphans with friendly curiosity. Shadow walked directly up to the small gray pup refusing food and pressed his nose against hers. The wolf equivalent of, "Hello, I see you. You're not alone." The gray pup's eyes widened with surprise, then something that might have been cautious interest. "Your pup is breaking protocol," one of the caregivers said nervously. "We're supposed to introduce new wolves slowly to avoid overwhelming—" "Let him," Alicia interrupted gently. "Shadow knows what he's doing. He's been where that pup is right now." They watched as Shadow settled beside the gray pup, not demanding interaction, just offering presence. Within minutes, the gray pup had shifted slightly closer, drawn by whatever comfort Shadow provided. "How did he do that?" the caregiver asked, bewildered. "I've been trying to connect with Winter, that's what we call her, for 3 weeks. She won't engage with anyone. Shadow speaks the language of loss," Alicia said quietly. "He doesn't try to fix her grief or tell her everything will be okay. He just sits with her in it and promises she's not alone. Sometimes that's all lost pups need. Someone who understands without trying to rush the healing." Across the shelter, Trouble had located a cluster of 4 pups huddled together defensively and was apparently lecturing them about something. Probably proper toy-sharing techniques or her ongoing Boots vendetta. 2 of the pups looked confused, one looked slightly amused, and the 4th had started wagging his tail hesitantly. "That one is making friends through sheer force of personality," Marcus observed from his position near the door. "It's like watching a very small, furry diplomat negotiate peace through the power of confident opinions about footwear." "Is she actually discussing boots?" Meredith asked, torn between horror and fascination. "Absolutely," Marcus confirmed. "She's very passionate about appropriate wilderness attire. It's her signature topic." Despite the heaviness of the moment, several caregivers smiled. The first genuine expressions Alicia had seen since entering the shelter. "May I?" Alicia asked, gesturing toward the pups who weren't currently being charmed by her own wolves' various diplomatic approaches. "Please," King Kieran said, and the desperate hope in his voice made her chest tighten. Alicia moved through the shelter slowly, letting her instincts guide her toward pups who needed connection most urgently. She found a tiny brown pup curled in the corner, trembling despite the warm room. "Hey there," Alicia said softly, settling nearby without crowding. "I'm Alicia. You don't have to talk to me or trust me or do anything except exist right now. That's completely acceptable." The pup's trembling eased slightly, just enough to suggest he'd heard and appreciated the lack of pressure. "I know everything feels impossible right now," Alicia continued, using the gentle tone that had worked on 11, now 12, other frightened wolves. "I know you miss your family. I know the grief feels too heavy to carry. And I know everyone keeps telling you it will get better, which probably feels like they don't understand how much it hurts." The pup's head lifted slightly, dark eyes focusing on Alicia with the first hint of real attention. "Here's what I can promise," Alicia said. "It will hurt for a while, maybe a long while, and that's okay. You're allowed to be sad and angry and scared. You're allowed to not be okay. But eventually, not today, maybe not even this month, you'll have a moment where something makes you laugh or feel curious or interested. Just one moment. And that moment will feel strange and maybe even wrong, like you're betraying your lost family by feeling anything except grief. She paused, letting the words settle. But that moment won't mean you loved them less. It will mean you're starting to carry the grief instead of letting it carry you. There's a difference. And when you're ready, only when you're ready, I'll be here to help you figure out how. The silence that followed felt weighted with significance. Then, so quietly Alicia almost missed it, the small brown pup whispered, "Promise? I promise," Alicia said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me now." The pup shifted slightly closer, not quite touching, but close enough to suggest trust might eventually be possible. Around the shelter, similar scenes were playing out. Her 12 pups had become bridges between the hollow-eyed orphans and the possibility of connection. Ash and Ember were demonstrating some kind of elaborate game that involved strategic pillow positioning. Storm had gathered a small group of suspicious-looking pups and was apparently bonding with them through shared wariness of new situations. And Hope, tiny, traumatized Hope who'd been rescued just days ago, had found 3 other pups who looked equally lost and was offering them the same comfort Alicia had given her. "This is extraordinary," Meredith said quietly, watching the transformation with visible shock. "In 20 minutes, you've made more progress than we've managed in 6 months." "It's not me," Alicia protested. "It's just understanding what they need. They don't need activities or programs. They need someone who acknowledges their pain without trying to fix it too fast. They need permission to be broken while still believing they can eventually heal." King Kieran moved to stand beside her, his presence warm and solid. "That's exactly what makes you special. You see their grief and don't flinch away from it. You sit with them in the darkness and promise light exists without demanding they find it immediately." His voice dropped into something raw. "I've been so focused on solving the problem, on fixing them, that I never stopped to just be with them in their pain. I've been a king trying to manage a crisis instead of an alpha understanding his pack's suffering." "You can't be everything to everyone," Alicia said gently. "You're responsible for an entire territory. You can't personally heal every broken pup while also managing defenses and resources and everything else that goes into running a pack." "No," King Kieran agreed. "But I should have understood earlier that solving and healing are different things. That sometimes the answer isn't more programs or better facilities. It's just someone who knows how to sit with grief without making it worse." He looked at her with an expression that held gratitude and something more complicated, something that made Alicia's wolf sit up and pay attention, despite her very clear, no romantic arrangements boundary. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming. For seeing what they needed when I couldn't. For being exactly the shepherd I'd hoped existed." Before Alicia could respond, Winter, the gray pup who'd been refusing food for weeks, padded over to the caregiver who'd tried so hard to connect with her. The pup nudged the woman's hand gently, then accepted a small piece of food with visible effort. The caregiver's eyes filled with tears. She ate. She actually ate. Because she saw Shadow eat, Alicia explained. He showed her that accepting food doesn't mean giving up grief. It just means choosing to survive long enough to carry it. Sometimes lost pups need to see other lost pups living before they believe it's possible. "Your pups are saving ours," Meredith said, and there was no trace of her usual briskness, just honest emotion. "They're showing them how to be broken and surviving simultaneously. That's what we do," Alicia said simply, watching her 12 furry criminals work their magic on an entire shelter of orphaned wolves. "We survive together until surviving becomes living again." The rest of that first day passed in a blur of introductions, small connections, and gradual progress. By evening, when Alicia finally returned to her quarters exhausted and emotionally wrung out, she had a list of 17 pups who needed immediate attention, 34 who needed regular check-ins, and approximately 90 more who'd shown slight improvements just from seeing her 12 pups model healthy grief processing. "You changed everything," King Kieran said, having walked her back to her rooms. "In one day, Everything we couldn't accomplish in 6 months. I didn't change anything, Alicia protested. I just showed them it was okay to be sad and surviving simultaneously. That's not extraordinary. Yes, King Kieran said firmly. It absolutely is. They stood in her doorway, and the air between them felt charged with something complicated. Gratitude mixed with respect, mixed with an attraction Alicia was working very hard to ignore. Tomorrow we visit the other 2 shelters, Meredith had said earlier. Same approach. Let your pups work their magic, and you work yours. Tomorrow meant 260 more orphaned pups who needed hope. Tomorrow meant more grief, more broken hearts, more desperate attempts to help wolves believe life was worth living. But tonight, Alicia had 12 pups who'd spent the day being heroes, 17 new connections who'd accepted her presence, and an alpha king looking at her like she'd personally invented sunlight. That felt like enough to face whatever tomorrow brought. Even if she still had no idea what she was actually doing beyond winging it with compassion and hoping for the best. 3 weeks into her work with the Northern Territory's orphaned pups, Alicia discovered that saving broken wolves was significantly easier than navigating pack social dynamics during formal dinners. I don't understand why I need to attend, Alicia protested for the 3rd time that evening, while Meredith stood in her doorway holding a dress that looked both elegant and deeply intimidating. Because, Meredith said with strained patience, you're now officially recognized as the territory's shepherd. That makes you important enough that your absence from formal gatherings would be noted and interpreted as either illness or insult. Neither is acceptable. Can I be fake ill? Alicia asked hopefully. No, Meredith said flatly. You're attending. You're wearing this dress. You're making polite conversation with visiting nobles who've come specifically to meet the miraculous shepherd everyone's talking about. And you're doing it without threatening anyone with pup-related violence. That was one time, Alicia muttered. And that merchant deserved it. I'm not disagreeing, Meredith said, her mouth twitching toward a smile. I'm just saying tonight's crowd requires more diplomatic approaches to conflict resolution. 2 hours later, Alicia stood in the keep's formal dining hall wearing the elegant green dress that made her look significantly more sophisticated than she felt, surrounded by approximately 40 nobles who kept staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. I hate this, Alicia whispered to Marcus, who'd been assigned to her vicinity with instructions to prevent social disasters. Everyone hates formal dinners, Marcus assured her. They're performative suffering disguised as cultural tradition. Just smile, nod, and if anyone asks complicated questions about pack lineages, pretend you hear someone calling you from across the room and escape gracefully. That's your professional advice? Alicia asked. I'm a guard, not a diplomat, Marcus said cheerfully. My professional advice for most situations involves strategic applications of weapons. This seems like the wrong venue for that approach. Before Alicia could respond, a woman in elaborate formal robes approached with the predatory smile of someone about to ask uncomfortable questions disguised as polite interest. You must be the famous shepherd, the woman said, her tone suggesting famous might not be entirely complimentary. Lady Cordelia Ravenswood, I've heard fascinating stories about your unconventional methods with the orphaned pups. Alicia Thornbrook, Alicia responded, trying to channel Meredith's professional courtesy. And my methods are less unconventional and more just paying attention to what they actually need. How refreshing, Lady Cordelia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Though I must say, some of us are curious about your background. Weren't you rejected by Silverpine Pack 3 years ago? Something about a defective bond? The words landed like a physical blow, and Alicia felt her stomach drop into her shoes. Around them, several conversations quieted as nobles tuned in with the sharp interest of people sensing drama. I was, Alicia said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Marcus Thornwood rejected our bond. He believed it was weak. And yet here you are, calling yourself a shepherd, Lady Cordelia continued with false sweetness. One might wonder if this gift is genuine or simply King Kieran being generous to a she-wolf in need of purpose. The implication hung in the air, that Alicia was charity, not capability, that her work with the pups was pity, not power. Before Alicia could formulate a response that didn't involve violence or tears, a familiar voice cut through the crowd with the kind of authority that made nobles instinctively straighten their spines. "One might wonder," King Kieran said, appearing at Alicia's side with winter storm eyes fixed on Lady Cordelia with distinctly unfriendly focus. "Why a visiting noble would insult my territory's shepherd during a formal dinner meant to honor her work. That seems remarkably poor judgment, Lady Cordelia. Perhaps you'd like to reconsider your line of questioning." Lady Cordelia's face went pale. "Your Majesty, I meant no insult. I was simply curious about whether Alicia's 3-year-old rejection defines her current value?" King Kieran interrupted, his tone arctic. "Let me clarify. Alicia Thornbrook has accomplished in 3 weeks what 6 months of traditional approaches failed to achieve. 400 orphaned pups are eating properly, engaging with caregivers, and beginning to trust again. That's measurable, observable success that has nothing to do with generosity and everything to do with genuine ability." He moved slightly closer to Alicia. Not quite touching, but close enough that his presence felt protective and solid. "Her past rejection says nothing about her worth and everything about Marcus Thornwood's catastrophic failure to recognize value," King Kieran continued with devastating courtesy. "Anyone who suggests otherwise is welcome to leave my territory immediately. I'm sure we can arrange transportation for wolves who don't appreciate the shepherd's contributions." The silence that followed could have been carved into monuments. Lady Cordelia looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Several other nobles who'd been leaning forward with interest in the drama suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. "I apologize, Shepherd Alicia," Lady Cordelia managed, her voice tight with embarrassment. "I spoke without thinking. Your work with the pups is indeed impressive." "Thank you," Alicia said, because Meredith's lessons on diplomatic responses were kicking in even through her emotional turmoil. "I appreciate your apology." Lady Cordelia retreated with visible haste, leaving Alicia alone with King Kieran while nobles pretended very hard not to eavesdrop on whatever happened next. "You didn't have to do that," Alicia said quietly. "Defend me so publicly. It's going to start rumors about—" "I don't care about rumors," King Kieran interrupted firmly. "I care about my shepherd being treated with respect she's earned through actual work instead of being judged for a rejection that had nothing to do with her value." His hand found hers, just for a moment, a brief squeeze of reassurance and solidarity, before he released it with visible reluctance. "You belong here," he said quietly enough that only she could hear. "Not because I'm being generous, but because you're genuinely extraordinary at something no one else can do. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Before Alicia could respond, Meredith appeared with the efficient timing of someone who'd been monitoring the situation from across the room. "Your Majesty, the visiting delegates from the Eastern Territories need your attention regarding trade agreements," she said briskly. Then to Alicia, with unexpected gentleness, "You've fulfilled your social obligations for the evening. Feel free to retreat to your quarters. No one will judge your absence after that performance." "Performance?" Alicia asked weakly. "You handled Lady Cordelia's rudeness with remarkable grace," Meredith clarified. "And King Kieran's defense was appropriately protective without being excessively territorial. Overall, an excellent example of pack hierarchy functioning properly." She paused, and something almost warm entered her expression. "Though between us, I would have supported pup-related violence as a response option. Lady Cordelia is insufferable." Despite everything, Alicia laughed. "I'll keep that in mind for future formal dinners." "Please don't," Meredith said dryly. "I have enough paperwork without adding incident reports about nobles being attacked by small furry diplomats." Alicia retreated to her quarters with relief, finding her 12 pups sprawled across various furniture in poses that suggested they'd spent the evening practicing the art of maximum comfort. Shadow lifted his head when she entered, yawned dramatically, and made the questioning whimper that translated to, "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Alicia assured him, changing out of the elegant dress into comfortable sleeping clothes with profound gratitude. Just reminded that pack dynamics are significantly more complicated than pup care. She climbed into bed, and immediately her furry criminals rearranged themselves into their preferred sleeping configuration. Shadow and Hope curled against her sides, Trouble across her feet, Storm at the head of the bed like a guardian, and Ash and Ember creating a tangled pile near her knees. Through her window, Alicia could see lights from the keep's dining hall, where the formal dinner continued without her. Somewhere down there, King Kieran was managing nobles and trade agreements and all the complicated tasks that came with ruling a territory. He'd defended her publicly, called her extraordinary, made it clear that anyone who questioned her value would answer to him personally. That felt significant in ways Alicia wasn't quite ready to examine. He's making it very difficult to maintain my no romantic arrangements boundary, Alicia whispered to Shadow, who responded by licking her chin sympathetically. Outside, an owl hooted. The keep settled into evening quiet, and Alicia, rejected Omega turned shepherd, surrounded by 12 sleeping pups who trusted her completely, allowed herself to believe that maybe she was exactly where she belonged. Even if formal dinners were still terrifying, and nobles remained capable of weaponizing past rejections during polite conversation, tomorrow she would return to the shelters. Tomorrow she would continue helping orphaned pups learn to trust again. Tomorrow she would face whatever new challenges arose with the same determination that had carried her through 3 years of rebuilding after Marcus Thornwood's rejection. But tonight, she had 12 warm pups, a king who believed she was extraordinary, and the dawning realization that her gift, this shepherd ability she was still learning to understand, might actually be real. That felt like enough to face whatever came next. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after Alicia's arrival, on a morning when frost painted the windows in crystalline patterns, and the entire territory seemed to be holding its breath for something none of them could name. Alicia stood in Shelter 3, facing a small silver pup who hadn't shifted into human form in 8 months, not since the frost plague had taken her entire family and left her alone with grief too heavy for such small shoulders to carry. Her name was River, though the caregivers had chosen that name without ever hearing her speak it. She was found alone by the frozen river, the only survivor of her pack, still waiting for her mother to wake up. "She's forgotten how to be human," the lead healer, a gentle older wolf named Thomas, had explained during Alicia's first week. Or maybe she's decided being wolf is safer. Less complicated. Less painful. River spent her days in the corner of Shelter 3, watching other pups with hollow eyes that held no hope, no curiosity, no spark of life beyond basic survival instinct. She ate when food was placed directly in front of her, slept when exhaustion forced it, and existed in the kind of profound isolation that made Alicia's heart crack every time she saw it. "I don't know how to reach her," Alicia admitted to King Kieran, who'd taken to visiting the shelters daily to check on progress. "Every approach I've tried just makes her retreat further. It's like she's built walls so high that no one can climb them." "Maybe that's the problem," King Kieran said quietly, watching River from across the shelter. "You're trying to climb the walls instead of sitting outside them until she's ready to open the door herself." The observation struck something deep in Alicia's chest, the recognition that sometimes the best help was patient presence instead of active intervention. So, Alicia changed tactics. Instead of approaching River directly, she simply sat nearby every day. Not talking, not trying to coax or comfort or fix, just existing in the same space, letting the small silver pup grow accustomed to her presence the way wild creatures learn to trust, through time and consistency and zero pressure. Shadow joined her on the 3rd day, settling beside Alicia with the patient wisdom of a pup who understood waiting. Hope came on the 5th day, pressing against Alicia's other side. And gradually, one by one, her 12 pups created a quiet circle of support around River's isolation, not invading, just offering. "That's the strangest intervention I've ever witnessed," Marcus observed on day 7, watching Alicia and her pups sit in absolute silence while River pretended they didn't exist. "You're literally doing nothing." "I'm doing the most important thing," Alicia corrected. "I'm proving I won't force anything, that she's safe to be broken for as long as she needs, that there's no timeline for healing." "That's either brilliant or you've convinced yourself sitting still counts as work," Marcus said. "I'm genuinely unsure which." Both can be true, Alicia said serenely. I contain multitudes. On day 10, River shifted slightly closer, just a few inches, barely noticeable except that Alicia had been watching for exactly this sign. On day 12, River made eye contact for 3 full seconds before looking away. On day 14, she accepted food from Shadow's bowl instead of waiting for a caregiver to bring her own. Small victories that felt monumental. And then, on the morning of day 17, when Frost painted everything silver and the world felt suspended between seasons, River did something that made every wolf in the shelter stop breathing. She shifted. Not fully. Not into complete human form, but into that awkward half-state young pups used when they were testing boundaries between wolf and human. Her small silver body flickered and reformed, bones reshaping with the uncomfortable cracking sounds of someone remembering a transformation they'd deliberately forgotten. And when the shift completed, a tiny girl pup with silver hair and storm-gray eyes stared at Alicia with an expression that mixed terror and desperate hope in equal measure. "You came back," Alicia whispered, not moving, barely breathing for fear of disrupting this fragile moment. "You're so brave, River. So incredibly brave." River's mouth opened. The first attempt at speech in 8 months. No sound emerged at first, just the shapes of words she'd forgotten how to form. Then, so quietly it was barely audible. "Mama?" The single word shattered Alicia's composure completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she carefully, slowly opened her arms in invitation. Not assumption, just offering. "I'm not your mama," Alicia said gently, her voice breaking around the words. "Your mama loved you so much, and she had to leave too soon, and that's not fair and it hurts more than anything. But I'm here now, and I promise you're not alone anymore." For one endless moment, River just stared at her with those storm-gray eyes that had seen too much loss too young. Then, with visible effort, she took one step. Then another. Then she was running, stumbling in her unfamiliar human form, crying with sounds that spoke of 8 months of accumulated grief finally finding release. Alicia caught her, pulling the small pup against her chest while River sobbed with the kind of desperate abandon that came from finally feeling safe enough to fall apart. "I've got you," Alicia murmured, rocking gently while River's small body shook with emotion. "You're safe. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to miss her. You're allowed to be broken and healing at the same time." Around them, the shelter had gone absolutely silent. Caregivers stood with tears streaming down their faces. Thomas the healer looked like someone had performed a miracle right in front of him. And several other pups who'd been watching River with the recognition of shared grief had started crying too, like her breakthrough had given them permission to acknowledge their own pain. Shadow pressed against Alicia's leg, whimpering softly. His version of, "I'm here, and I'm proud of her." Hope crawled into Alicia's lap alongside River, offering solidarity from one traumatized pup to another. And King Kieran, who'd arrived just in time to witness the transformation, stood frozen near the entrance with an expression that cycled through awe, gratitude, and something more complicated that made Alicia's heart skip several beats. "You did it," Thomas whispered, moving closer with careful reverence for the moment. 8 months we tried everything, and you did it by doing nothing except being present." "I didn't do anything," Alicia protested. "She did all the work. She chose to come back when she was ready. You gave her safety to make that choice," King Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. "You proved that healing didn't require abandoning grief, that she could be human and still miss her mama. That's what we've been missing all along. Permission to be broken while learning to live again." He moved closer, crouching beside Alicia, and the small pup still crying in her arms. "River," he said gently. His alpha authority softened into something that sounded almost paternal. "You're one of the bravest wolves I know. Thank you for coming back to us." River lifted her head from Alicia's shoulder, regarding King Kieran with red-rimmed eyes that held the first spark of actual awareness Alicia had seen. "You're the king," River whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "I am," Kieran confirmed. "And you're one of my pack, which means you're precious and protected and never alone, even when it feels like you are." Alicia says it's okay to be sad, River said, like she needed to confirm this revolutionary concept. Alicia is absolutely right, Kieran agreed. Being sad means you loved someone worth missing. That's not weakness. That's proof of the strongest kind of love. River absorbed this information with the gravity of someone reconsidering fundamental truths about the universe. Then, with the blunt honesty that only young pups possessed, "Your boots are very fancy." The complete non sequitur made several people laugh, tension breaking in waves of relieved amusement. "That's what Trouble keeps telling me," Kieran said with a slight smile. "Apparently, my footwear choices are controversial." "Trouble is very smart," River said seriously, "about boots and other important things." "She's definitely smart about something," Alicia agreed, earning an indignant yip from Trouble, who'd just entered the shelter with Ash and Ember. The twins immediately bounded over to investigate River with enthusiastic curiosity, making excited sounds about her finally being back and demanding to know if she wanted to play their new game that involved strategic pillow fort construction and possible snack theft. Within minutes, River was surrounded by Alicia's pups offering welcome in their various chaotic styles, Trouble discussing proper toy distribution ethics, Storm providing suspicious assessment of the shelter's security from his corner position, and Shadow maintaining his role as quiet emotional support. "She's going to be okay," Thomas said, watching River attempt to explain to Ash and Ember that she wasn't sure she remembered how to play games. "Not immediately, but eventually." "You gave her that chance." "We gave her that chance," Alicia corrected. "Everyone here who kept her safe while she healed. I just showed her it was okay to take her time." The rest of that day passed in a blur of emotion and celebration. Word spread through all three shelters that River had shifted, that the pup everyone had quietly given up on had come back. And something shifted in the collective energy, like hope had become contagious. By evening, 5 other pups who'd been stubbornly clinging to wolf form had attempted partial shifts. 3 succeeded. 2 weren't ready yet but had made the effort, which counted as progress. "You started a revolution," Meredith said during dinner that night, a private meal in Alicia's quarters because the formal dining hall felt like too much after the emotional intensity of the day. "River's breakthrough is spreading. Pups are trying things they wouldn't attempt yesterday because they saw her succeed. Hope is contagious," Alicia said, watching her 12 pups create elaborate sleeping arrangements that somehow required all the furniture and twice as much space as should physically be necessary. Once one pup believes healing is possible, others start believing too. King Kieran had stayed for dinner despite Meredith's pointed comments about appropriate boundaries and people starting to notice things. He sat across from Alicia, his winter storm eyes reflecting firelight, and something that looked suspiciously like contentment. "What you did today changes everything," he said quietly, once Meredith had left with final instructions about tomorrow's schedule. "Not just for River, but for every pup who witnessed it. You proved that recovery is possible even after the deepest grief." "River proved that," Alicia corrected. "I just sat nearby and waited." "You created the space for her to be broken safely," Kieran countered. "That's what makes you extraordinary. You don't try to fix grief. You hold space for it until wolves are ready to carry it themselves." The intensity in his voice made Alicia's breath catch. They were alone except for sleeping pups. Meredith had taken the hint and departed with knowing looks that Alicia was actively choosing to ignore. "Kieran," Alicia said carefully, using his name instead of his title for the first time. "What are we doing here?" "What do you mean?" he asked, though his expression suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "You look at me like I'm something precious," Alicia said, forcing honesty despite her fear. "You defend me against nobles. You spend every free moment visiting the shelters to watch me work. And I told you 6 weeks ago that I wasn't interested in romantic arrangements, but I'm starting to think I might have been lying to both of us." The silence that followed felt weighted with significance. Shadow lifted his head from where he'd been sleeping, assessed the emotional temperature of the room, and apparently decided this was an important moment that required his presence. He padded over and settled directly between them, the world's smallest and most determined chaperone. "I think," Kieran said slowly, choosing words with visible care, That I've been falling for you since the moment you threatened a merchant with pup-related violence. And I've been trying very hard to respect your boundaries, while also making it extremely obvious that if you ever changed your mind about those boundaries, I would be very interested in discussing alternative arrangements. Despite the seriousness of the moment, Alicia laughed. That's the most diplomatic way I've ever heard someone say, "I'm attracted to you, but trying not to be creepy about it." "I'm a king," Kieran said with mock dignity. "I'm supposed to be diplomatic. It's in the job description. Right between look regal and make speeches that inspire people." "How's that working out?" Alicia asked. "Terribly," Kieran admitted. "I'm approximately 3 seconds from abandoning diplomacy entirely and just telling you that you're the most extraordinary wolf I've ever met, and I would very much like to court you properly if you'd allow it." The honest desire in his voice made Alicia's heart race. "I was rejected 3 years ago," she said quietly, "publicly, for being defective, and I spent those 3 years rebuilding myself into someone who didn't need external validation. But you make me want to risk that safety. And that's terrifying." "I know," Kieran said, "and I won't push. If you need more time, or if you decide you'd rather keep things professional, I'll respect that. But I need you to know, you're not defective. You were never defective. Marcus Thornwood was an idiot who couldn't recognize the most valuable gift the moon has ever granted, and his loss is my territory's extraordinary gain." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "With your compassion and your courage and the way you threaten merchants while somehow making it sound reasonable. With your ability to sit in grief without flinching and your conviction that broken things deserve time to heal. With everything that makes you exactly who you are." The words hung between them like a promise and a question. Shadow, apparently deciding this moment required commentary, yipped softly and pawed at Kieran's leg, which Alicia interpreted as either "go for it" or "I approve of this potential mate situation." "I'm falling for you too," Alicia admitted, the words emerging in a rush before her fear could stop them. "And I don't know what that means or where it goes or if I'm ready for it. But I know I trust you. And I know you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. And that feels like enough to at least try." The smile that broke across Kieran's face was devastating, pure joy mixed with relief and hope and something that made him look years younger. "Then we try," he said simply. "Slowly, at your pace, with absolutely no pressure and complete freedom to change your mind if you decide this isn't what you want." "Those are good boundaries," Alicia agreed. "I'm good at boundaries," Kieran said. "It's one of my 3 king skills, along with looking regal and making speeches." "What about the purple robes incident?" Alicia asked innocently. "Meredith said those were destroyed for the good of the territory." "We don't discuss the purple robes," Kieran said firmly. "That was a temporary lapse in judgment that everyone has agreed to never mention again." "You brought them up first," Alicia pointed out. "I'm reconsidering that decision," Kieran admitted. They sat in comfortable silence while 12 pups snored in various locations, and the fire burned low. Outside, the Northern Territory settled into night, hundreds of wolves finding rest in homes and shelters, safe and protected and beginning to heal. "Tomorrow I want to try something with the other shelters," Alicia said, already planning the next steps. River's breakthrough proved that patience works. "I want to implement the same approach territory-wide. Less structured programming, more sitting with grief, letting pups set their own pace for healing." "You have complete authority," Kieran reminded her. "Whatever you think will help, we implement. Even if it means telling caregivers to do less instead of more?" Alicia asked. "Especially then," Kieran confirmed. "You've proven your instincts are better than our traditional methods. I trust you completely." The simple faith in his words made Alicia's chest tight with emotion. 3 years ago, she'd been rejected and told she was worthless. Now, an alpha king trusted her completely with his territory's most precious resources. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing in me, for giving me space to prove myself, for being patient while I figured out how to trust again. Thank you for being brave enough to try," Kieran countered. for walking away from safety toward something bigger, for being exactly the shepherd we needed. He stood reluctantly, and Shadow immediately protested the disruption of their small circle. "I should let you rest," Kieran said. "Tomorrow will be intense if you're implementing new protocols. But Alicia?" He paused at the door, turning back with an expression that held promise and hope. "I meant what I said, about falling in love with you, about wanting to try, and I'm willing to wait however long you need to feel safe with that." After he left, Alicia sat in the quiet of her room surrounded by 12 sleeping pups, and the dawning realization that her life had transformed completely in 6 weeks. She'd arrived terrified of failing. She'd stayed because the work mattered, and now she was building something real, not just with the pups, but with a king who looked at her like she was extraordinary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow she would implement territory-wide changes that might succeed brilliantly or fail spectacularly. Tomorrow she would continue helping hundreds of orphaned pups learn to trust again. But tonight, she had 12 warm pups, a king who was falling in love with her, and the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. River had come back today, had chosen to be human again after 8 months of grief-induced isolation, had proven that healing was possible even after the deepest loss. If River could be that brave, Alicia could be brave too. Could let herself believe in second chances, in new beginnings, in the possibility that being rejected once didn't define her worth forever. Shadow crawled into her lap, purring with contentment. Hope joined him, pressing her small red-brown body against Alicia's side. And surrounded by the wolves who'd followed her into the unknown, Alicia closed her eyes and let herself believe in the impossible. Tomorrow would bring the final test, the moment when everything she'd built would either prove lasting or reveal itself as temporary hope. But tonight, hope felt like enough. 3 months after River's breakthrough, on a morning when winter arrived with the dramatic flair of someone making a grand entrance, the Northern Territory woke to the first major snowstorm of the season, and Alicia woke to the sound of approximately 40 wolf pups having simultaneous panic attacks. "This is fine," Alicia muttered, pulling on boots while Shadow attempted to climb her leg in protest of the weather. "This is completely manageable. Just 40 terrified pups, a blizzard, and my 12 furry criminals who think this is the perfect time to demonstrate their leadership skills." As if summoned by her sarcasm, Trouble burst into her quarters yipping urgently, which Storm translated into something approximating 6 new pups from Shelter 2 tried to go outside to see the pretty snow and are now lost somewhere between here and the training grounds. "Of course they are," Alicia said, already moving, "because nothing says excellent morning like a search and rescue operation during a blizzard." What followed was 30 minutes of organized chaos that proved everything Alicia had built over 3 months. Her 12 pups split into teams with the efficiency of seasoned rescue workers, Storm leading the suspicious but competent tracking group, Ash and Ember coordinating the search pattern with strategic precision, and Trouble somehow managing to both locate lost pups and lecture them about proper weather assessment protocols. By the time they'd retrieved all 6 wayward explorers and returned them safely to shelter, Alicia was covered in snow, exhausted, and absurdly proud of her furry criminals who'd transformed from traumatized orphans into confident leaders. "That was impressive," King Kieran said, appearing with blankets and hot drinks, like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Your pups just organized a territory-wide rescue operation with 0 adult supervision." "They're overachievers," Alicia said, accepting the warm cup gratefully while her 12 pups preened with obvious pride. "I blame their excellent role model." "You're not wrong," Kieran agreed, and the warmth in his voice had nothing to do with the drink. The crisis had barely settled when Meredith appeared with an expression that suggested something significant was about to happen. "Shepherd Alicia, there's a visitor requesting to see you, from Silver Pine Pack." Alicia's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Marcus Thornwood," Meredith said with the careful neutrality of someone delivering potentially explosive news. "He says he's come to apologize." The silence that followed could have been carved into monuments. "No," Kieran said flatly, his alpha authority rolling out in waves. "Absolutely not. He rejected her publicly, and now he thinks he can just show up and— Let him in, Alicia interrupted quietly, surprising herself and everyone else. I need to do this. Not for him, for me. 10 minutes later, Alicia stood in a private receiving room facing the wolf who'd called her defective 3 years ago. Marcus Thornwood looked older, tired, and deeply uncomfortable, which was satisfying in ways Alicia hadn't expected. Alicia, he started. I came to say, let me save you some time, Alicia interrupted, and her voice was steady in a way that 3 years ago Alicia never could have managed. You rejected me because you thought our bond was weak. You called me defective in front of the entire pack. You made me believe I was fundamentally broken. Marcus winced. I was wrong. I've spent 3 years watching my actual mate, the one I chose after you, struggle with a bond that feels hollow compared to what I felt with you. I threw away something extraordinary because I was too stupid to recognize it. You're right, Alicia said simply. You were stupid. But here's the thing, Marcus. I don't care anymore. She paused, letting the words settle. You didn't break something valuable. You just proved you weren't capable of recognizing value. And that says everything about you and nothing about me. I spent 3 years rebuilding myself, discovering gifts I didn't know I had, and building something extraordinary with wolves who actually see me. Shadow growled from his position at her feet, a tiny, fierce sound of absolute loyalty. So thank you, Alicia continued, for rejecting me. Because if you hadn't, I never would have found my actual purpose. I never would have saved hundreds of orphaned pups. And I never would have met someone who loves me for exactly who I am instead of what he thinks I should be. Marcus looked like he'd been struck. Alicia, You should go, Alicia said, not unkindly. Just definitively. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. But you won't find it here. This chapter of my life is closed. After he left, escorted firmly to the border by Marcus the guard who'd offered enthusiastic volunteer services for removing unwanted ex-mates, Alicia found Kieran waiting in the hallway with an expression that mixed pride and fierce protectiveness. You were extraordinary, he said. Watching you take back your power from someone who tried to steal it was— I don't have words. I surprise myself sometimes, Alicia admitted, feeling lighter than she had in years. 3 years ago, I would have apologized to him, would have made his rejection somehow my fault, but I'm not that person anymore. No, Kieran agreed, stepping closer with careful intention. You're the shepherd who saves lost pups, the woman who transformed an entire territory, the person I'm completely in love with. The words hung between them like a promise. I love you too, Alicia said, the admission easier than she'd expected. I love your terrible purple robe choices and your patient leadership and the way you look at my pups like they're the most important creatures alive. I love how you defended me against nobles and believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I'm going to kiss you now, Kieran said, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. She didn't want to retreat. The kiss was gentle and fierce simultaneously, a promise and a beginning wrapped in warmth that spread through Alicia's entire body. When they finally broke apart, 12 pups were watching with expressions ranging from approval, shadow, to theatrical gagging sounds, trouble, to excited yipping, the twins. We have an audience, Alicia observed. We always have an audience, Kieran said with resignation. Privacy is apparently not part of the shepherd lifestyle. That evening, the territory held an official ceremony in the Great Hall. Something Meredith had been planning for weeks with characteristic efficiency. The entire pack gathered as King Kieran stood before them with Alicia at his side. 3 months ago, Kieran announced, his voice carrying across the hall, I brought a rejected Omega to our territory because ancient prophecies spoke of a shepherd who could save lost pups. What I didn't know was that she would save more than pups. She would transform our entire understanding of grief, healing, and community. He gestured to the assembled crowd, where hundreds of pups, the ones Alicia had helped heal, stood with their caregivers looking healthy, engaged, alive in ways they hadn't been months ago. Therefore, with the full support of my council and the gratitude of every family in this territory, I officially recognize Alicia Thornbrook as Shepherd of the Northern Territory. Her sanctuary will be permanent, her authority absolute over all pup welfare, and her gift celebrated as the precious resource it is. The hall erupted in howls, the wolf equivalent of thunderous applause. Alicia stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of acceptance, until River, brave River who'd come back from 8 months of grief, padded forward and pressed her small silver head against Alicia's hand. "Thank you for teaching me it's okay to be sad and alive at the same time," River whispered. Behind her, dozens of other pups lined up, each one offering gratitude in their own way. And Alicia, surrounded by the proof that her gift was real and valuable and world-changing, finally let herself believe it completely. 6 months later. "Dear Vera, you're not going to believe what happened. Actually, you probably will believe it because you predicted most of it with your terrifying accuracy about people. Remember how I was terrified I'd fail? Well, I didn't fail. I spectacularly succeeded, which is both satisfying and slightly overwhelming. The pups are thriving. All 400 of them, plus the 60 new ones who've arrived from other territories after word spread about the miraculous shepherd. The sanctuary is now officially called Moonhaven, and it's everything I dreamed. Spaces for healing, play areas, trained caregivers who understand that grief needs patience, and approximately 500 toys that Trouble has personally quality tested. Shadow is officially my personal guard and takes his job very seriously. Hope is training to become a caregiver herself. She wants to help other traumatized pups heal. Storm runs security protocols with suspicious efficiency. Trouble has a collection of 17 bootlaces from various defeated nobles and guards. Ash and Ember are teaching advanced mischief techniques to the next generation. And River, beautiful, brave River, wants to be a shepherd when she grows up. Oh, and Kieran asked me to be his mate. Officially. With a formal courtship period and everything proper because apparently alpha kings have protocols even for falling in love. I said yes, obviously. He's patient and kind and looks at me like I'm extraordinary, and I finally believe I might actually be. Marcus showed up trying to apologize. I told him I didn't care anymore, and I meant it. That chapter is closed. Come visit sometime. The Northern Territory is beautiful, and I promise the drunk patrons are significantly less violent than your tavern crowd. Missing you terribly, Alicia P.S. Trouble says your assessment of proper boot quality was correct, and I should tell you she's continuing your important work. She sealed the letter as Kieran entered their shared quarters. Because yes, they live together now, surrounded by pups who considered privacy a suggestion rather than a rule. "Writing to Vera?" he asked, settling beside her near the fire. "Telling her about our success and your terrible courtship protocols," Alicia confirmed. "My courtship protocols are very romantic," Kieran defended. "I bring you flowers and write poetry and do all the traditional things. Your poetry compared me to a fierce mountain storm with excellent organizational skills," Alicia said. "That's possibly the least romantic thing I've ever heard. You are a fierce mountain storm with excellent organizational skills," Kieran protested. "It was accurate. Accuracy and romance are not the same thing," Alicia laughed. Through the windows, Moonhaven stretched across the landscape. Stone buildings mixed with gardens and play areas, all filled with the sounds of pups learning to trust again. The sanctuary she'd built, the gift she'd accepted, the life she'd created from rejection and determination and refusing to believe she was broken. Her 12 original pups had spread throughout the room in their preferred sleeping positions. Shadow at her feet. Hope curled near the fire. Storm by the door. Trouble sprawled across a chair she'd claimed as her personal throne. The twins creating their nightly pillow architecture. River tucked against Alicia's side, small silver head resting on her lap, and Kieran beside her, his hand finding hers with the easy comfort of someone who belonged there. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Completely," Alicia said, meaning it with her entire heart. Outside, an owl hooted. Stars emerged against darkening sky. And somewhere in the sanctuary, Dozens of orphaned pups who'd been lost found safety in the place Alicia had built from compassion and stubborn refusal to give up. The rejected Omega had become the shepherd. The broken wolf had become the healer. And the pups, all the lost pups who'd run to her across territories and forests and time, had found home. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this story moved you the most? Was it River's transformation? Alicia standing up to Marcus? The moment when Kieran admitted he was falling in love? Comment below. I read every comment and love hearing what resonated with you. And tell me, do you want more stories like this? Stories about rejected wolves finding their purpose, about healing being messier than fixing, about love that sees value even when the world says you're broken? Stories where being exactly yourself is the superpower you needed all along. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any episodes. We post new videos every day with intense, emotional stories full of heart and hope. Thank you for listening until the end.